this thing where you said, hey, wait a minute, I just redoubled my efforts, it didn't work. I think most people just keep trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. Somehow you had the awareness to realize that that's not what you do.
Well, the awareness was certainly helped by the prospect of being fired, I must say. But
imagine that.
It is also true. I mean, you and I know that, you know, one of the things that is very useful in life is the 80-20 principle. And since I was 19, I'd sort of come across Vilfredo Pareto and the principle. And I always knew that there was a way of doing things such that you put in less effort and you got more result. So I knew that. But actually, I didn't know that in a sense, you know, because the natural reflex action, which you describe, is so powerful and it's so pervasive and it's all in our culture. You know, anyone that's ambitious is brought up to work hard, to believe in the Protestant ethic, to believe that they really do need to spend, you know, be very intense about their career and spend a lot of time doing it. And I think that's rubbish. I really think that's rubbish. But it's easy for me to say that now because I've come out the other side. Yeah. At the time, you know, I had certainly felt, you know, if I was going to get on top of things, I had to work more intensely and so on and so forth. So the deliverance came really from external forces, from the market in a sense, not from the ideas, even though the ideas are terribly important. But I always say to people now, you know, for God's sake, if you're in a job and you're not enjoying your job, and you're not, you know, other people, your bosses don't think you're good, you know, if at first you don't succeed, quit, because there is a job for you. There is a job for you which you will love, and actually I loved the job at Bain & Company. It was a completely different kind of firm, and I was, you know, I was suited to that particular culture. I wasn't suited to the BCG culture. In a business which, you know, to the outside looks ostensibly very, very much the same. So, you know, one of my things is the star principle, the idea that, you know, a business to be really, really successful has got to be, firstly, in a very high growth market. And secondly, it's got to be the market leader in that market. Well, the market growth is something maybe which you can create yourself if it's a very, very small micro segment. But you know, it's absolutely essential. And the dynamics in a firm which is growing at 30% a year or 40% a year, or in LEK we doubled in size, we increased by 100% each year for 6 years, which is, you know, I mean, it's absolutely staggering what that does. What that does is open up the development of people because the opportunity is there, there's a vacuum. And people, you know, nature abhors a vacuum and people, you know, just manage to flourish in that kind of situation. It is a completely different dynamic from a firm that is doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same place with exactly the same kind of people, but just not growing. You know, growth is the answer. You know, we are meant to develop, you know, and one way to develop is to change jobs. But another way to develop is just to be in a situation where there's a very, very high growth rate. And growth is rare, but it is possible. You know, even in a recession, even in a depression, there are some firms that are growing at 20%, 30%, 100% a year. There was one firm that I invested in called Betfair, which just shortly after I invested in, it was growing at 50% a month. And that is just amazing. I mean, it didn't have to hire, you know, 50% more people a month because it was an internet business and therefore, you know, it had huge operating leverage. But nevertheless, you know, that is just a wholly different ball game. It's just fantastic. And yet, when I say to people things like, well, why don't you work in a fast growth company? They look at me as though I'm crazy, I'm nuts, you know. They say, well, you know, it wasn't important, or, you know, I didn't ask about the growth rate, or I didn't do any research. And I say to people, well, you know, it makes so much difference. And also you want to be in at the beginning of a company if you possibly can. But that's also highly correlated with high growth rate, because when you're very, very small, it's much easier to grow very, very fast. And it's just different. You know, you get stock options, which may become very valuable. You learn how to do things, you get confidence. And even if a firm isn't successful, you know, you just learn so much, and it's fantastically enjoyable. You know, it's so different, and people just don't appreciate that.